Incredible twist. Homeless woman's breakfast, surprise revealed as soldiers arrive at mechanic's shop. The sun climbed over the horizon, casting a gentle light on the grease-smudged glass of Jake's auto repair shop. Every morning, he slipped into his coveralls, his hands stained with a lifetime of toil, the scent of motor oil grounding him. But today felt different. As Jake wiped his hands on a rag, the familiar clinking of tools echoed with an unsettling undertone. He sensed a storm brewing. It started with Maggie, the homeless woman who had become an unexpected part of his routine. Maggie walked in each day with a warm breakfast, her smile bright against the dingy walls of the shop. At first he questioned her motives, wondering if there was a catch. Why would a woman with nothing want to offer him food? But as days turned into weeks, her presence transformed from a curious anomaly to a comforting ritual. She reminded him of the simple joys he had almost forgotten, the way a good meal could spark light even in the darkest of corners. Yet, the increasing pressure from the townsfolk gnawed at him. They wanted him to expand, to relocate to that shiny mechanic shop downtown, where affluent customers awaited. The allure of new machines, a sleek facade, and the promise of higher profits called to him at night, whispering tales of success that felt tantalizingly out of reach. What would it mean for him? To leave behind the town that raised him, that shaped him? Could he trade the touch of a community for the empty glitz of commercial success? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The tension coiled tightly, each moment filled with uncertainty. He could feel the stakes climbing. Success and failure intertwined like the spokes of a wheel. Was it selfish to dream bigger? And what about Maggie? As he watched her laugh with the kids passing by, he felt a pang of responsibility. It was easy to ignore his heart during the day, to bury the guilt under the noise of engines and tools. But at night, when silence embraced him, it was Maggie's face that haunted his thoughts. A tragic story unfolded in his mind. A woman promising warmth forged from a brutal past. Then, one fateful morning, just as he was amidst thoughts of expansion and the future, a group of soldiers entered the shop, their presence startling against his chaotic yet comforting world. They stood proudly in their crisp uniforms, but the shock came when they revealed the truth about Maggie. She was their lost mother. The news spun around him like a whirlwind, tearing through the illusion of his burgeoning ambitions. Could he really pursue his dreams when the echoes of her family's cries for connection tugged at his heart? He stared at Maggie, grappling with the weight of revelation. Her smile turned fragile, the glimmer of her spirit dimming under the spotlight of her past. Jake felt the urgency swell within him, the dawning realization that he could lose her, lose everything. Caught in this storm of conflicting emotions, one truth struck his core. He was now responsible not only for his success, but for the collective fate intertwined with those brave soldiers. Would he dare abandon loyalty for ambition? The question clawed at him as he stood frozen, balancing on the edge of a new beginning, oblivion, and an irrevocably altered path. Jake's heart raced as he processed the soldier's words, the implications crashing over him like a tidal wave. Maggie, once a mere fixture in his routine, had transformed into a living testament of sacrifice and loss. Action was suddenly required. He could sense it reverberating through the grease-stained floors of the shop. He glanced back at Maggie, who stood clutching the breakfast tray like it held the answers for them both. Her eyes showed deep sorrow, yet beneath it burned a flicker of defiance, a reminder that she had survived against all odds. The soldiers began telling their stories of how they searched for her, the years spent in service while she remained lost from them, Jake felt the weight of their desperation, yet he couldn't shake the conflicting emotions swirling within him. This wasn't just about mechanics and business. This was about humanity, connection, and the critical choices he had to make. He paced the shop, muscles tense as reality sunk in. Was expanding his business worth sacrificing a potential reunion for this family? Could he truly claim success while someone suffered nearby? With every step, the grinding gears of his mind sharpened. The contemplative turmoil shifted towards a palpable urgency. This wasn't where he envisioned himself. He had never intended to face life-altering decisions today. "We can help," Jake suddenly asserted, startling himself with the strength of his words. He approached the soldiers, determination swelling in his chest. "Let's find a way to get her back to you." The men nodded, surprise flickering in their eyes, as if they had not expected that response from a man who had seemed so entrapped in his own struggles. Maggie's gaze, too, fell upon him with a mix of disbelief and hope, as if she could not fathom anyone would go to such lengths for her. Jake recognized that look, the way her features softened, how hope lingered just beneath the surface. The act of helping Maggie transcend his fear of failure. It shifted the narrative of his life from mere survival to one of profound significance. In the midst of all this revelation, another type of pressure coiled around him. The pressure to rise above, to be not just a mechanic, but a force for good in the world. He had always been an expert in engines, yet the idea of mending a broken heart sparked something new within him. He calculated his next moves like he would an engine overhaul, every detail becoming crucial. "Okay, we need to think of a plan," he said to the soldiers, summoning a newfound authority. His voice carried a blend of urgency and confidence, igniting a collective energy in that dusty shop. He swiftly reached for a piece of paper and began writing down ideas: how to reach social services, involve the media, create a rallying cry that could resonate beyond the faded walls of his shop. Maggie approached cautiously, placing her hand on his arm, grounding him momentarily. "Thank you, Jake," she whispered, and for the first time, he noticed the tremble in her voice. It hit him then, the realization that his choice could forge a road to healing not just for her, but potentially for himself. He had spent years trapped in monotony, yet here was an opportunity to connect, to revive the purpose that had been dormant within him. Facing the soldiers, he took a breath, feeling the intensity of the moment. The town's whispers of expansion that had once stifled him now seemed miles away. Jake was ready to shift the gears of his life into a new direction. But as the gears of the plan began to turn, he couldn't shake the feeling of something lurking behind the shadows, an unseen force that threatened to unravel everything before it could begin. The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. Would they be able to bring Maggie back to her family, or would the bureaucratic maze swallow them whole? Jake felt the remnants of his past clash with the burgeoning fight for something greater. The next steps to take on this daunting path became uncertain, but one thing was clear. The road ahead would demand everything he had. A new urgency surged. The battle to mend lives had just begun. Jake studied the makeshift plan he'd hastily drafted on the paper, his mind spinning from the weight of responsibility. The soldiers' stories echoed in his ears, lost years and endless longing. He considered the enormity of the task he had undertaken. This had shifted from a personal mission into something larger, each detail rapidly spinning into a reflection of his own life choices. "Time is our enemy," one of the soldiers remarked, breaking Jake's trance. The urgency in his voice stoked Jake's fear. What if their efforts fell flat? What if the bureaucratic systems proved too complex, too indifferent? He felt a tremor of doubt bounce off the walls of his mind, but he couldn't allow himself to falter. Not now. He wouldn't let Maggie down. "Let's meet with social services right away," Jake replied, a determined edge in his tone. "If we can get them aware of the situation, they may expedite her case." The soldiers nodded, encouraged by his initiative. But deep down, Jake was wrestling with the knowledge that while he had stepped out of his comfort zone, he lacked the expertise to navigate this unfamiliar territory. As they prepared to leave the shop, a flicker of self-awareness pierced through his focus. He'd spent years entrenched in the mechanics of life, tools, engines, and grease. But now he was being thrust into the raw reality of human emotion. This was the stuff of courage, of vulnerability. He felt a visceral connection to Maggie and her soldiers that transcended anything he'd encountered at his workbench. Each soldier took turns outlining their plan of attack, breaking down steps into manageable segments. Jake hung on their every word, his analytical mind functioning at full capacity. Building upon their ideas, he suggested reaching out to a local reporter who had covered similar stories of reunification. It was a risk, but it could amplify the urgency of their quest, sparking community interest. But a new fear clawed at him. What if Maggie didn't want to return? What if the shadow of her past loomed larger than her hopes for the future? Navigating her desires would be just as challenging as maneuvering through the red tape. The weight of these unknowns settled heavily on Jake's shoulders. As they finalized their plan, an unexpected vulnerability surged through him. Could he truly be the force for good in her life he envisioned himself to be? His galvanized ambition faltered under the weight of this nagging uncertainty. He caught sight of Maggie and saw that same flicker of defiance reflected in her eyes once more. It steadied him momentarily. Their path was set. Tension blended with hope as they prepared to meet with social services. The flicker of purpose pushed Jake onward, yet anxiety coiled at the edges of his mind, ready to strike. Would this journey uncover strength, or would it simply reveal more of his limits? Determined, he took a deep breath. "We're doing this for her," he assured the soldiers. Each word rang louder than the last, resonating with the promise of action. This was the moment to reject fear, to confront the unknown. Yet just as they began to step outside, Jake felt a chill slide down his spine. Absent from his calculations was a new variable, an unanticipated obstacle that threatened to thwart their efforts. He glanced at Maggie, who was still fragile, but edged with a growing resolve. Was the answer to their unknowing hurdles within reach, or merely a mirage on the horizon? Silence filled the air as they prepared to leave the shop behind, every step becoming a resolute embrace of uncertainty. Jake now stood at a precipice. Would he dive into the depths of vulnerability alongside Maggie, or pull back into the safety of his familiar world? The answer loomed just out of sight, leaving an unshakable tension that demanded resolution. Would this act of moral courage redefine his life, or would it lead him down a path of unforeseen consequences? The air outside the shop was heavy with the impending weight of the meeting ahead. Jake stepped onto the cracked pavement, each footfall an echo of doubt. He felt the chill seep in deeper, as if the weight of Maggie's fate pressed against his chest. Turning to the soldiers, he tried to mask his uncertainty with an assured nod, but inside, a tempest raged. The local social services office was a flurry of hurried voices and bureaucratic forms. The sterile walls felt confining, and the fluorescent lights above buzzed incessantly, their energy draining rather than illuminating. As they approached the front desk, Jake's heart hammered against his ribcage, each beat reminding him of what was at stake. "I've got the paperwork," one of the soldiers said, breaking Jake from his reverie. The soldier's bravado reignited a flicker of hope within him. Forward motion was essential. The more dynamic they were, the less time there was for doubt to settle. They were greeted by a woman in a sharp blazer, who looked up with tired eyes that seemed to have seen too many stories end in misfortune. "What can I help you with today?" she asked, the monotone of her voice echoing Jake's fears. Before he could speak, one of the soldiers stepped in, rattling off their purpose. Jake felt a surge of energy in the room, supportive and tense. He was part of something larger than himself, yet he recognized his own inadequacy. What could he bring to this table that would matter? As the soldiers explained Maggie's situation, he felt the feedback of their shared passion amplify, but he remained tangential. The more they spoke, the more Jake felt as if he were watching from a distance, a mere observer of the life-changing event occurring in front of him rather than an active participant. Then, almost instinctively, he interjected, "Maggie has faced obstacles beyond calculation. The emotional toll is just as immense." It was an unfamiliar weight on his tongue, but clarity rushed in after his assertion. Perhaps his strength lay not in the mechanics of systems, but in understanding the mechanics of human resilience. The woman behind the desk raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this unexpected perspective, as the soldiers nodded in agreement. Jake stumbled into a metaphor he hadn't anticipated, the idea that emotional struggles are akin to engine blocks seized from years of neglect. They needed thawing, not replacement. At the sight of her growing interest, the tension inside Jake curdled into a sense of urgency to unravel the layers of Maggie's struggle. If he could articulate it well, perhaps he could change things. In that fleeting moment, however, doubt reemerged, lapping at the edges of his newly claimed confidence. What if he was misreading the room? What if sharing Maggie's story further exposed her vulnerabilities and led to her rejection rather than resolve? The stakes climbed, each breath tasting sharper and more acidic. As the social worker began taking notes, Jake could feel everyone's attention shift toward him. This was the crux, the intersection of his fears and his desires playing out like an engine misfiring under pressure. Would he harness this moment to become an advocate, or stall out under the scrutiny? Just then, a voice within urged him to step back. He witnessed the horror of his inertia, the potential paths diverging into territories of regret or triumph. Jake cleared his throat, the act of fierce confrontation of his internal battle. Maggie's story is not just a tale. It's a thread woven into the fabric of countless lives. We need to make sure it's honored. Instantly, silence fell over the room. Each gaze locked onto Jake, assessing the weight of his words. The soldier beside him squeezed his shoulder, a silent recognition that this was no longer just about Maggie, nor was it solely about their mission. It was about Jake, his evolution from observer to participant, from mechanic to advocate. Each step, each word carved a new path of possibility. Yet the trembling knowledge of what lay beyond this moment, a potential rejection or a flicker of hope, held him captive between two realities. As the social worker nodded slowly, a thin smile creeping onto her face, Jake felt the air shift again, sparking that subtle weight of resolve vying against doubt. But inside him, another storm brewed. Would this commitment draw him deeper into vulnerability, or would it spiral into a confrontation far beyond his willingness to endure? As their meeting progressed, each question posed to him unfurled like a wild card, heralding challenges that could fracture everything he sought to protect. And there, poised on the precipice of understanding, Jake realized that if he was truly going to navigate the murky waters ahead, he had to confront the hardest truth. Was he prepared to confront the ghosts of his own past, unraveling the fears that tethered him? The moment arrived just as the social worker stood to confer with her colleagues, leaving Jake in a thick silence where everything hesitated. The weight of the answer lay heavy on his shoulders. What would he discover about himself in the face of this chaos? Would he dive deeper into the unknown, or retreat to the safe haven of his past? Jake felt the suffocating silence envelop him, pulling at the frayed edges of his composure. Every glance exchanged among the soldiers was a reminder of the stakes involved. The weight of Maggie's fate reinforced the immensity of his new role. As the social worker conferred with her colleagues, Jake's thoughts spiraled back to his own history, a chaotic mix of unresolved pain and distant dreams. He couldn't afford to be just a spectator anymore. Each moment spent in self-doubt expanded the chasm between who he was and who he wanted to become. Involuntarily, he remembered the last time he felt this exposed, teetering on the brink of discovery. It was a moment that had left him scarred. Had he merely made choices dictated by fear? The social worker returned, her expression thoughtful. Jake took a deep breath, each inhale igniting an ember of determination, rehearsing his moment of agency. The words he needed to say coalesced at the forefront of his mind. "So," she began, "can you tell me more about how Maggie has been coping?" The focus was back on him, the cue for Jake to reclaim his narrative. He steadied himself, his voice finding its rhythm against the cadence of uncertainty. "Maggie is resilient," he stated, surprising himself with the conviction. "Every challenge she's faced has made her stronger. But what she needs now is a community that understands that strength. She's not just seeking services, she's looking for a lifeline." As he spoke, Jake felt the atmosphere shift. The soldiers leaned in slightly, their expressions mirroring the seriousness of the topic, and the social worker reached for her notebook again, her pen poised to capture not just words, but the essence of what they were fighting for. He continued, delving deeper into Maggie's experiences. The nights spent alone, the moments when hope seemed like a distant dream, and the small victories that had kept her afloat. With each detail he shared, Jake noticed the tremors in his own voice began to lessen. Vulnerability transformed into strength, as if sharing Maggie's story was, paradoxically, allowing him to start forging his own. The social worker nodded, her eyes brightening. "It sounds like you've really taken the time to understand her. It's refreshing to see someone engaging on such a personal level." He felt a rush of warmth at her acknowledgement, barely realizing he was beginning to carve out his identity in this new role. The child of a mechanic had often been viewed through the lens of machinery, but today he was anchored in compassion, clarity igniting the muddy waters around him. Suddenly the soldier next to him chimed in. "What about her family connections? Is there anyone we can reach out to on her behalf?" The question hung in the air, thick with implications. It seemed simple enough, a practical inquiry. But for Jake, it triggered an avalanche of memories. Family had always been a minefield. Everyone around had their own baggage, and he wasn't sure how deep Maggie's roots ran. I don't know much about her family," he stammered, feeling vulnerable again. But then he recalled their past conversations. Maggie had mentioned her sister, a distant figure cloaked in resentment. Perhaps this was an opening. "I think she might have a sister. They haven't spoken in a while. It's complicated." The social worker scribbled more notes, and Jake felt the moment shift again. Did he dare pursue this thread further? Would reaching out to Maggie's sister be a catalyst for healing, or would it push Maggie back into the darkness of her past? The thought sent a rush of uncertainty through him. He could open wounds he wasn't ready to face himself. Maybe, he hesitated. If she's willing, it might be worth exploring. It could be what Maggie needs. Jake felt a shift not just in the room, but within himself as well. The act of considering reaching out shifted something fundamental. Instead of retreating to the safety of the past, he was delving into potentially treacherous waters. Doubt nagged at him like a misfire waiting to happen. Was he ready for the repercussions of uncovering Maggie's history? As the social worker deliberated on the best approach, Jake remained acutely aware of the gravity of his choices. This was no longer simply about advocating for Maggie. It was about confronting his own capacity for empathy amidst ambiguity. What if he failed her? What if opening up that line of communication would force him to unearth his own buried past? The enormity of the realization gnawed at him as he felt the walls close in again, not from a lack of air, but self-imposed constraints around his fears. He had ventured so far into this role. Could he push the boundaries even further? The lingering conundrum loomed large in his consciousness as the meeting came to a close. Would he find the courage to confront not only Maggie's challenges, but his own reluctance to accept the pain of familial ties? It would take a stoic resolve he was unsure he possessed. But if he was to help Maggie, perhaps he must first grapple with the shadows of his own past. and as he stepped away from the table, the weight of that question became his unwavering guide. Was he ready to be the catalyst for change, both for her and for himself? The answer awaited him, tangled within the complexity of their intertwined destinies. The lingering uncertainty suffocated Jake as he made his way through the corridors, each step echoing the turmoil in his mind. The meeting had sparked not only a fire in the discussions about Maggie, but also the kindling of his own hidden fears. With the soldier's inquiries still ringing in his ears, he felt the weight of impending responsibility pressing down harder than ever. In the maze of thoughts battling for attention, a singular idea surfaced: reaching out to Maggie's sister. The concept terrified him. Every time he considered it, a knot formed in his stomach. Was he ready to face the familial complexities he had spent years avoiding? Would this connection, however tenuous, help Maggie, or would it lead to more heartache? He found himself sitting at a nearby table, the flickering fluorescent lights above matching the anxiety bubbling within. He pulled out his phone, staring at its blank screen as if it held the answers he desperately sought. Maggie's sister was just a name on the tip of his tongue, a looming specter from their conversations. He couldn't shake the feeling that reaching out could bring either salvation or destruction. What if Maggie needed to confront that part of her life? What if she needed closure? The thought of pushing her toward something so fraught made his skin crawl. But then, wasn't that exactly what he had signed up for? Wasn't his role to advocate for the people who couldn't advocate for themselves? He breathed in deeply, feeling the air fill his lungs like a moment of clarity, one that inspired him to reframe his self-doubt. Instead of seeing the act as an intrusion, he could position it as an opportunity for growth, both for Maggie and himself. He envisioned how the conversation could unfold, each point he intended to make solidifying his resolved disposition. Could he really be an agent of change? As the minutes passed, he mentally rehearsed the steps he would take, the tone he would use, and the balance between compassion and assertion he would need to maintain. He would have to be gentle but firm, letting Maggie's sister know just how important her involvement was. More than that, it would be vital to acknowledge the painful history she shared with Maggie, a necessary prelude to any engagement. A sense of urgency surged as he imagined the possibility of chaos erupting from the reunion. Jake's hands twitched, restless with the dual impulses of action and hesitation. What if Maggie refused to speak to her sister? What if they both unleashed their pain upon each other? He could already hear the distant echoes of family anguish, feeling the scars of his own past flare at the thought. With clenched fists, he forced himself to take another deep breath. He needed clarity, yet the fight within him raged on. A glance at the phone offered no comfort. Its screen felt like a portal to his worst fears. But it was also a bridge to potential healing, if Maggie's sister stood willing. Before he could second-guess himself again, Jake pulled the phone from the table and began to type. The words came out clumsy, yet sincere. An introduction of himself, a mention of Maggie, and a tentative request to talk. Each letter felt like an ache in his chest, and at that moment, he realized this was more than just an outreach. It was a confrontation with everything he had avoided in his own life. The fear of rejection, the worry of stirring up old wounds, the temptation to turn away from discomfort. Once satisfied he'd articulated his intent, he hesitated over the send button. Would this act of reaching out define him, or catastrophically mismanage the trust placed in him? A clock ticked somewhere, and Jake's heart raced with it. Sometimes change demanded a willingness to step into the unknown, but he had been conditioned to tread carefully around danger. This was different. It required him to leap. With a sudden rush of resolve, he pressed send, releasing a fragment of himself into the ether. The moment of truth was upon him. But this was just the beginning. The uncertainty still loomed ominously, thickening the air around him. What would come back? An opportunity, a closed door, or a summons to revisit wounds he thought healed? As he put the phone down, he felt exposed, raw, and strangely alive with the possibility. Whatever the outcome, he was no longer a passive observer. This moment would propel him toward his own evolution, and only time would tell what awaited. His thoughts raced ahead, twisting toward the question that hung over him like a pendulum. Had he truly prepared himself to face the ramifications of his choice? It seemed the answer would unfold sooner than he anticipated. Jake spent the rest of the afternoon locked in a haze of anticipation, each minute stretching into what felt like hours. He returned to his workspace, glancing repeatedly at his phone, both waiting and dreading a response. The screen remained stubbornly dark, amplifying his doubts and fears. His own discomfort echoed in the quiet of the office, where the unrelenting sounds of typing and hushed conversations seemed foreign. Every click of the keyboard felt monumental in that silence, but his mind remained fixated on an internal dialogue. Did he truly have the strength to navigate the complexities of family pain? The thought of Maggie facing her sister stirred a tide of emotions, reminding him of the fractures in his own family that he had carefully concealed. Was confronting those old wounds worth the potential fallout? Jake attempted to redirect his focus, diving into the mountain of reports awaiting his attention. Yet, the words danced before him, slipping further away as he mulled over the conversation he envisioned having. He thought of Maggie's sister, who might be filled with resentment or fear. What if she unleashed her grief upon him? Was he equipped to support both women through the storm? His mind whirled with the details of their past, all while the clock ticked down the minutes, marking a haunting rhythm of unresolved tension. Then, a chime erupted around him, jolting his heart. The notification blinked like an omen on his phone. Heart racing, he turned to see the message, a single line that read, "I'm willing to talk." A surge of relief washed over him momentarily, enveloping the fear in a cocoon of determination. The opportunity he had risked everything for had arrived, yet it was shadowed by an immediate sense of responsibility. He wasn't acting alone. He was now a bridge between two fractured lives. Instead of celebration, dread crept back into his thoughts. How would he approach this? Should he call immediately? Or would it be better to give Maggie some control over how this played out? Foreboding settled into the pit of his stomach as he grappled with the gravity of what lay ahead. Compelled by an impulse he couldn't ignore, he texted Maggie, letting her know that he had reached out, and her sister was open to a conversation. He was met with a brief silence, every second amplifying his worries about how Maggie would receive the news. Would she feel exposed? Would resentment seep through in her response? Each question swirled in his head, drowning out the confidence he had built from simply sending that initial message. Finally, her reply pinged through, and he opened it with cautious hope. "What do you mean? She wants to talk?" The sheer bewilderment in her tone unnerved him. He had hoped for a more enthusiastic response, one that would imply she was at least slightly prepared for this alternate reality. Now came the challenge. How to relay the significance of this moment to Maggie, without overshadowing her own processing. He found himself pacing as he constructed his reply, trying to balance empathy with encouragement. The stakes felt staggering. He wasn't merely facilitating conversation. He was playing a role in a drama steeped in history and emotional scars. "Yeah, she wants to talk. I thought it might help," he sent, attempting to convey sincerity while trying to mask his own insecurity. "You have a chance for closure. A chance to explore what you both need." Jake's gut churned at the idea of pushing Maggie toward something she wasn't ready for. What if this spiraled into a deeper conflict? What if they both came out wounded? A response buzzed into life too soon. "I don't know, Jake. I'm not sure I want to do this." The words dangled like a blade above him, and he felt his heart race as a rush of anxiety overtook him. This was a palpable fork in the road, a moment where each choice carried weight. He could either encourage her to lean into it, or back away from what was shaping up to be an essential confrontation. Gathering his thoughts, Jake paced the room again, the tension brewing alongside the anxiety. He knew that he needed to act. The both of them needed to confront this pain, no matter how uncomfortable it became. As he mulled over the consequences of every response, he realized that this moment was not just about Maggie. It was about his own willingness to face the fragments of his past, to unearth those buried fears that had kept him shackled in hesitation. With a deep breath, he typed back, "Maggie, you don't have to do this alone. I'll be here. We can take it one step at a time." Would his reassurance be enough to empower her? Luke could already sense that a reckoning was approaching, but little did he know. The true test of their resilience was yet to unfold. What lay ahead was a different kind of confrontation, one that would challenge not just Maggie, but the foundation of Jake's own understanding of caring, confrontation, and connection. The moment of reckoning was here. And this time, they weren't just facing the past. They were confronting a future that waited impatiently on the fringes of their lives. As he hit send, a wave of uncertainty washed over him. Was he prepared for the truth that waited just beyond the edges of their shared histories? He could feel the tremors of a storm brewing on the horizon, and he also sensed it was a storm that would shape them both. The moment Jake pressed send, he felt a weight lift slightly, yet simultaneously grip him with a fiendish uncertainty. This pivotal exchange had rekindled his resolve, but it had also illuminated the jagged shards of his own insecurities. Would his support be a lifeline or a net that ensnared them both deeper into chaos? Tension flickered like candlelight within him as he anxiously awaited Maggie's response. Each second dragged. They unnervingly reminded him of the countless moments he had avoided genuine connections due to the fear of vulnerability. The scenario crystallized the bitter truth of his life thus far. He often played the role of a guardian to others without addressing his own shadows. Now, he was urged to step beyond the frayed edges of his carefully managed distance. Maggie's reply punctuated his turmoil like an unwanted thunderclap. "Maybe you're right, but I'm scared of what she might say." Her words resonated painfully in Jake's chest. He understood the fear that enveloped her. It mirrored his own. How many conversations had he sidestepped with his family, clutching onto the illusion of control? By striving to protect himself, he had forfeited the richness of deeper relationships, an understanding he began to realize was essential for true growth. With every heartbeat thrumming through his temple, he contemplated his next move. It struck him. This was about more than just Maggie's confrontation with her sister. He could help Maggie embrace this challenge, but he also needed to draw upon his own courage, the courage that once lay dormant beneath layers of self-doubt. The notion of navigating this turbulence, rooted in bravery, ignited a flicker of hope in the depths of his relentless apprehension. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs and ground his overwhelming whirlwind. He typed quickly, "You're stronger than you think, Maggie. It's okay to be scared. It's a part of the process. Even if it's hard, remember, you've faced challenges before." Once sent, he waited, the silence gnawing at his patience. Each tick of the clock echoed his resolve. How do you guide someone else toward confrontation when you still grapple with your own unaddressed fears? It was in grappling with this question that clarity began to seep in. The looming confrontation with Maggie's sister was not merely about their familial wounds. It was about forging connections and revealing truths, even when shadowed by uncertainty. As he deliberated, flashes of his unresolved family encounters invaded his thoughts. Memories flickered like film reels, the raised voices, the unspoken disappointments. He let himself sit with the discomfort of those recollections, allowing the sting of betrayal and longing to wash over him. Slowly, he realized he was not just a passive participant. He could change the narrative. If facing the storm meant uncovering the raw truth about himself, then perhaps that meant reconnecting with his ignored facets. Maggie's subsequent message broke his reverie. "What if I need help preparing? I don't want to drown in this." Jake inhaled deeply at her admission. It was an anchor thrown into the turbulent sea of despair. They needed a strategy, a way to navigate these uncharted waters together. He replied, "Let's do it together. I can help you think through what you want to say. Maybe we can write it down, practice. Would that sound okay?" As the conversation turned toward preparation, Jake felt momentarily lighter. The mere act of collaborating on this daunting task offered a sense of empowerment he had all but forgotten. Together, they would explore articulations of pain and uncertainty, an opportunity to unveil truth. In that space of support, Jake caught a glimpse of his overlooked potential. It became clear. Confronting family issues had never been solely about confrontation, but also about connection. The act of listening and sharing could forge a path toward healing, and here lay his chance to reclaim his narrative, channeling his own past into wisdom. His phone buzzed again. "Okay, let's meet tomorrow after work. I'll try to gather my thoughts." Jake's heart fluttered. She had taken a step forward. But then, an urgent thought tugged at the corner of his mind. Helping Maggie meant opening his own floodgates. Could he truly face his family wounds in parallel with hers? The dual confrontation loomed closer than ever, and Jake was left wondering. Would their mutual vulnerabilities empower them? Or would they spiral into the depths of unresolved conflicts they feared? There was no time to hesitate. Decisions awaited, shaping futures that already felt intertwined. They were about to embark on a shared reckoning, one that promised transformation, yet threatened to expose everything they sought to hide. Would he dare confront his own history alongside Maggie's? Jake took a steadying breath, understanding that the answers lay just beyond the veil. The next day felt heavy with meaning, each moment fraught with anticipation. Jake arrived early at the cafe where he and Maggie had agreed to meet. He chose a corner table, allowing for a view of the door while sipping on a lukewarm coffee that barely registered on his palate. His mind teetered between excitement and dread as he replayed the stakes. This was not just a strategy session for Maggie, but a prelude to his own unraveling. He fidgeted with the edge of the napkin, 1,000 thoughts racing through his mind. How could he help Maggie confront her sister about their tumultuous past, when he hadn't yet summoned the courage to face his own family's shadows? His phone vibrated, jolting him from his spiraling thoughts. A message preview flashed. "I'm on my way." As Maggie entered, the morning light harshly outlined her features, casting a glow that seemed to wash over the uncertainty hovering between them. She looked slightly disheveled, probably reflecting the mental labyrinth each of them had navigated since their last conversation. When their eyes met, Jake felt a fluid connection surge, unspoken yet palpable. They were preparing to dive into the depths together. "Hey," she greeted, her voice barely above a whisper, laden with the weight of the task ahead. "Hey," he replied, forcing a smile to temper the clouds looming in his chest. "Ready to tackle this?" She nodded slowly, her face a mixture of determination and apprehension. "I've been thinking. I want my sister to really listen, but I'm scared she won't hear me." Jake understood her fear. It mirrored his own. The conversation was less about the clash with Maggie's sister, and more about the long-buried truths within themselves, waiting to be uncovered. He took a deep breath, searching for the right approach. "Maybe we can start by listing out what you want from this conversation. What do you hope to achieve?" Maggie placed her hands around her coffee cup, eyes narrowing as she contemplated the question. "I want her to understand why I walked away. I thought distancing myself would protect us both, but it just made the hurt grow." Her admission struck a chord. Clinging to the belief that isolation could shield him from pain had been Jake's own folly. "And do you think she'll be receptive?" he inquired, curiosity guiding his prompt. "I hope so," she said, the vulnerability in her voice probably a reflection of her fears. "But what if I'm wrong? What if she reacts in anger?" Jake leaned in, sensing a deeper truth within her turmoil. "Emotions will be raw, and that's okay. Use it as a catalyst for an open exchange. It's that rawness that might pave the way toward understanding, even if it hurts. Maggie's hesitant nod affirmed his thoughts. They began to sketch ideas, jotting down sentences aimed at bridging the chasm that had grown between her and her sister. As they worked, Jake realized the path was demanding not just for Maggie, but for himself too. Each word they chose felt like a thread being pulled on his own tapestry of unresolved pain. As they crafted sentences, sharing introspective dialogues and reflections, a new urgency sparked within him. Each realization drew him closer to the truths he had long buried. He wasn't just helping Maggie. He was unearthing facets of himself he had kept shackled. The prospect of sharing his own burgeoning desires for confrontation alongside hers was both scary and exhilarating. Maggie glanced at him, her fear wrestling with newfound resolve. "What do you think? Will this help?" Jake offered a reassuring smile, his confidence entwined with the anxiety swirling inside him. "It's a start. You're not alone in this, remember?" In that moment of connection, they shared a breath of vulnerability and strength, a quiet agreement to face the daunting path ahead together. Normal distractions faded as they leaned into their shared goals, creating a safe harbor amidst the storm. Yet, as the conversation flowed, another thought ignited within Jake's mind. The choice of confronting his family, long debated yet never acted upon, loomed heavier than ever. What if today wasn't only about helping Maggie, but about stepping into his own reckoning? This burgeoning realization pulled him in two directions. The weight of uncharted territory pressed down upon him. Could he summon the courage to initiate his own confrontation before the day was over? With every ounce of determination, the urgency intensified as they prepared to put their words into practice. Jake's heart raced, knowing that the moment approached where they would have to possibly face the demons they both had avoided for too long. Would they leave their meeting prepared to embrace the truth, or would the fears of their pasts resurface to imprison them both in familiar patterns? Uncertainty loomed large, and in it, the truth beckoned more than ever. Perhaps healing was only a confrontation away. The cafe buzzed with life, yet Jake felt encased in a bubble as he and Maggie pored over the carefully crafted words, their plans solidifying into something more than just sentences. Each phrase they plucked from the ether was meant to bridge chasms of hurt, yet they simultaneously comprised Jake's own burgeoning recognition of the pain he had long avoided. With every stroke of the pen, he sensed an urge to confront his family's shadows, mirroring Maggie's own desires for closure. "Maggie," Jake said with newfound determination, "your sister isn't the only one with unresolved issues." The words tumbled out before he fully processed their weight. "I think it's time I spoke to my own family." Maggie's eyes widened, absorbing the seriousness of this admission. "You think you can?" she asked softly, a blend of surprise and encouragement lacing her tone. He nodded slowly, the horizon of possibility expanding before him. "I've spent too long keeping my distance, afraid to face the past. If I'm going to help you, I need to do this for myself, too." A profound silence enveloped them, charged with two parallel confrontations. The courage it took for Maggie to even consider speaking to her sister became an unspoken rallying call for Jake, encouraging him to face the narrative he had run from for far too long. "What are you going to say?" she inquired, her curiosity layered with support. "That I acknowledge the hurt I've caused by keeping my distance. I want to rebuild connections, as difficult as that may be. I want them to know I'm here, willing to engage." He paused, the weight of vulnerability pressing in. "I think living in fear of their disappointment has stifled both their voices and my own." Maggie offered a warm, genuine smile, reflecting a clarity that resonated deeply within Jake. "I think that's the right approach," she affirmed. "Facing the truth hurts, but it can also be liberating. It's healing." Jake felt a wave of affirmation wash over him. With every exchange, they drew strength from one another's resolve. As their dialogue morphed from practical strategies to deeper reflections on their identities, he realized it wasn't just about condemning the past, but about carving out a new narrative that included courage, empathy, and connection. The day grew brighter as their shared insight crystallized into actionable steps. Maggie began to see the value of rehearsing her words in anticipation of her sister's responses, while Jake envisioned his own opening lines. They spent the next few hours not only preparing for their individual challenges, but fortifying each other's spirits. He could see her face light with encouragement as she acknowledged her fears, while he too found his own voice strengthened by her vulnerability. The lingering question of when to enact these profound transformations weighed heavily on Jake as they finished their preparations. "What if you have the conversation today?" Maggie suggested, a glimmering spark of challenge laced in her tone. He considered her proposition. "You mean after this?" "Why wait? We're in the right mindset. You're ready." Jake bit his lip, the pang of anxiety posing a familiar barrier against action. But there was a blaze of urgency igniting within him, urging him to leap. "You're right," he said, his voice steadier than before. "Let's make this happen." Seizing the spontaneity of the moment, Jake suggested they harness the buzz of the cafe and schedule a quick meeting with his family over lunch. "I'll invite them. They need to know I'm ready to mend things." Maggie beamed with excitement. "That's great. You may even inspire me to take that same step with my sister." Her joy invigorated him, turning the anxiety he felt into a catalyst for momentum. After packing up their notes and exchanging affirmations, they made their way outside together, hearts racing at the precipice of taking significant actions for their lives. The world around them buzzed with possibilities as Jake reached for his phone, extending an invitation to his family for lunch. As his thumb hovered over the send button, a wave of trepidation swept through him. What if this didn't go as planned? What if instead of healing, he only reopened wounds? "Deep breath," Maggie reminded him, empowered by her own reflections of fear. "You're poised not just to face them. You're ready to rewrite the narrative, both for yourself and for me." With that, he sent the message, an electric jolt racing through him as the message vanished into the ether. The weight, twisting in his stomach, held an undeniable force, the anticipation of uncharted conversations lingering softly in the air between them. They returned home with an undeniable purpose igniting the path forward. It was a typical day, yet within the simple layers of their existence lay the seeds of authentic growth. Each heartbeat was ground in the realization that confronting the unknown was essential not just for the day, but for the long-term integrity of their selves. The next hour felt otherworldly, dipping into the spaces they had avoided for too long, surrendering themselves to the ghosts of their own pasts. As they settled in, their minds wandered toward the collective potential of acknowledgement and healing. In the face of uncertainty, Jake felt proud, stepping into the calling of his own journey. The momentum of potential filled him as he readied himself. This was their moment. Together they set forth into the brave unknown, acknowledging they would both not be alone in their paths to resolve. In the quiet moments before their family would arrive for lunch, Jake found solace in the fact that both paths had illuminated the most significant transformation, the compelling choice to embrace vulnerability and chart a course to resolution. It was not the end of their journeys, but a powerful new beginning, unfolding a treasure trove of possibilities in which healing awaited. Jake and Maggie would share their complexities, confronting the edges of their pasts together, facing the shadows against the backdrop of sunlight. They had accepted one another's roles in this, recognizing that the metamorphosis ahead promised deeper understanding, not just of each other, but of themselves. And as they waited in expectancy, they both felt the magnetic pull of hope, and the undeniable truth that to heal meant to connect, to share bravely, and to allow the light of possibility to forge and remake their destinies. Jake took a deep breath and steadied himself. The moment had come, and he was ready to engage with the complexities of his past, opening the door not just to his family, but to his own unaired capacities for connection. Together, they leaned into the life that awaited them, no longer merely surviving, but truly embracing the transformative spirit of being alive. Jake watched the door, anticipation dancing in his chest, and felt an electric thrill rush through him. The clock, unyielding, pushed them forward. Their stories were about to intertwine. Their shared reckoning awaited as they each faced the moments that would ultimately illuminate their paths. This was the time for action, the moment for resolution, and Jake knew they were ready. Together, with a dawn of new possibilities shining over them, they stepped into the next chapter, determined to forge the futures they sought, not just for themselves, but for each other. The battle was not over, but they emerged from the confrontation with clarity, purpose, and a commitment to the ongoing journey of healing and resilience. Their stories, entwined in hope, would carry them forward into the uncertain yet thrilling tapestry of life, richer for the discoveries that awaited. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Your support makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending below. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.